Over the last 5 episodes, we've talked a lot about mental health in sports. From the pressure placed on athletes from a young age and onward, to addiction and toxic fandom, you've heard from former athletes, officials, reporters, and the loved ones of those no longer here with us. I know at times it probably hasn't been easy to hear what Todd Marinovich went through as a kid, the things Noah Carter and Walt Coleman dealt with, and the loss that Trina Derenbecker suffered. There have been some troubling statistics, unfortunate realities, and information that is no doubt hard to swallow. It's fair if at some point you may have wanted to stop listening, feeling it was just too hard to hear, or feeling that it was all too hopeless to deal with. I want you to know it's not hopeless. I know there are a lot of documentaries and podcasts out there that love to use tragedy as a type of pornography to make their audiences feel guilty, either as a means to manipulate them or for the creators of said content to feel some type of way. I don't have any interest in that. Anyone can put a lot of depressing information out there and just leave the audience to deal with it on their own. But then what's the point? To make people feel upset? What changes then? How can we get anything done if we just sit around guilt-tripping people for not having it as hard as others? I can't and won't tell you that there won't always be issues. As I said in the last episode, there will always be undue pressure, there will always be addiction, there will always be suicide. It's impossible to erase these things from existence. However, there are also many things being done today aimed at helping athletes deal with mental health issues. There are also many things that individuals and groups can do to improve even further. That's why I wanted to take this last episode not to tell you of a tragedy or suffering, but to tell you all the ways in which we can work to make things better. This is a podcast examining what happens at the intersection of mental health and athletics. It's about taking a look at the human side of those we often view as superhuman. It's an investigation into how it feels internally on a stage that's so external. Most importantly, it's a conversation about people under the brightest of lights and what happens to them when the lights go out. Episode 6. All together now. Progressiphobia. Harvard linguistics professor Steven Pinker coined this term in his 2018 book, Enlightenment Now: The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. The word progressiphobia is pretty self-explanatory. Those who fear or hate progress. Now, before you go deciding how you feel based on your political leanings, hear me out. Yes, of course, one form of progressiphobia is a genuine fear of change. Some progressiphobes are the image you likely have in your head of someone saying, "Back in my day this," or "Today's generation that." It's people who don't like the way the world is changing and long for a mythological nostalgia of the so-called good old days that never actually existed in the first place. However, Pinker also focuses on a different kind of progressiphobe. The ones that constantly cite the need for progress due to a lack of progress already, frequently shouting, "Things are worse than ever." A friend of mine whom I love and care for very much said to me back in 2020, "Quality of life has been in a decline for years, and I don't see things getting better." But here's the thing, that's not true. Spend just a few pages skimming through Pinker's 2018 book and you'll see pretty quickly that by nearly every measurable statistic, things are actually better than they've ever been. If you're thinking Steven Pinker is just some crackpot, consider this. The same year Pinker published Enlightenment Now, Swedish professor of international health Hans Rosling, his son Ola, and Ola's wife Anna Rosling Ronlund also released the book Factfulness: 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. In it, Professor Rosling shows that his test subjects believe the world to be poorer, less healthy, and more dangerous than ever before, when in reality, that's not the case. Early on in the book, Professor Rosling discusses a survey given to 10,000 people, asking them about the state of the world. As Hans put it, 80% of those polled knew less about the world than chimps, meaning if you were to randomly guess at the survey questions without trying, you had roughly the same chance at scoring as high as 80% of those surveyed. Bill Gates listed Factfulness as one of the best books he's ever read. Now, you probably have some questions or even counter-arguments whether you've read either book or not. Factfulness is 341 pages long, while Enlightenment Now is 576 pages. So I can't just summarize everything in them, though I would recommend reading both. The reason I mention both of them, however, is because they both found that in virtually every way, regardless of circumstances, things are better than they've ever been for everyone. And in nearly every case, things are continuing to get better. Make no mistake, there wouldn't be a need for me to make this podcast if things were perfect, or if there wasn't still work to be done. But I want you to know that there's already been a ton of progress made in the field of mental health and athletics, which seemed impossible not that long ago. I want to highlight that progress instead of ignoring it like some people choose to do, so you know that the work of those who fought for it wasn't in vain, and so you can see that change actually is possible. However, there's also a ton that can still be done that's within the power of people like you and me. There are things that can be done at a higher level too, which may be harder to achieve, but not impossible if we continue to fight like those before us have. So, let's look at what's already being done and what can still be done. Let's start by looking at pressure. As mentioned in the first episode, there's more of a spotlight on athletics than ever before, and youth athletics has exploded in particular. We explored that through the story of Todd Marinovich, the all-everything prep quarterback raised to be an athlete. He shared plenty of concerns with the way youth sports are being conducted today, from the parents to the media and others. However, he also sees the conversation around mental health and athletics expanding more than it ever has before.
We're getting somewhere as a culture that people are able to talk about their deficiencies, their fears, being vulnerable. That wasn't even in the human or the American language. Whoa, this principle or this term of being vulnerable. No man is going to be vulnerable. It wasn't taught and it wasn't discussed. Like there's strength in that, and there's some courage in that, and there's some actual value in that. And I love being vulnerable with another human being because that's where a connection and a common ground can be found. And without connection, I will die. And so when my head works on me, because my head still tells me lies daily, and I take action through that, my head will say, you know what? Don't reach out your hand. Don't talk to this person. And my vision, sometimes I can be very judgy, and my heart is not. And then when the head starts working on me, my feet and my action toward this person is, hi, I'm Todd. And how are you doing today? Because heart is not about me. And my mental health, I am so much healthier when I'm asking about you. Every time when I get caught up in my day and I notice I'm not centered and I feel like I'm all about me every time, I have to stop and go, whoa, what can I do for somebody else? And when my thoughts are like that and my actions are like that, my days are magical.
Mental health has also been improving among college athletics since the pandemic. An NCAA survey published in December of 2023 polled more than 23,000 college athletes between September of 2022 and June of 2023. From Division I to Division III, mental health concerns decreased. 17% of male athletes said they felt they were constantly overwhelmed, down from 25%, while 16% reported feeling mentally exhausted, down from 22%. The largest decline was among Division I athletes, who notably are the ones playing on full scholarships and receiving NIL deals. However, that doesn't mean there's not still work to be done. While the numbers were down for women as well, the overall numbers were still much higher and the decline much smaller. 44% of female athletes reported feeling overwhelmed, a decline of just 3%, while 35% felt mentally exhausted, also just a 3% decline. Studies done in 2020 and 2021, along with the 2023 poll, showed that non-white students and LGBT students reported more mental health struggles as well. Notable, though, is that the bulk of concerns brought up were academic-related, though future planning, financial concerns, playing time, and family issues were factors as well. So, what can still be done to help athletes like that? 40% of women and 54% of men said they would feel comfortable talking with their coaches about mental health concerns in the 2023 survey. That's actually a decrease of 9% for women and 8% for men. The two mental health experts I spoke with believed having support systems within the athletic department is critical for fostering a more positive environment. Let Janell explain.
The other thing I think that is often a missed opportunity is training coaches and athletic trainers, right? They're often the first line, not training them to be mental health clinicians, no, but to recognize signs of someone that's struggling, to be able to listen in a different way. Just a general sense of being able to teach mental skills training to athletes. I have high school athletes come in and coaches have told them, you're not performing well, it's mental, get out of your head. But they're not giving them any tools of how to do that. So they don't know. But once we start doing breathing exercises or doing more mind-body awareness of what's going on and doing that kind of work with them, next thing you know, they're using those skills not only to perform better, but to help them before they take the ACT or before they ask somebody out on a date. So these are life skills. And I think sport is the perfect landscape to teach these kids life skills. Like I treat a lot of high school boys who wouldn't go to therapy for anxiety, but they'll come to sports counseling. That'll help their performance. Next thing you know, we're talking about conflicts they're having with their peers, or we're talking about difficulties that they're witnessing between their parents at home. So it can open up so much, but sport gives it an acceptable way to express emotion.
In addition to training coaches how best to talk about these issues, it's also important to remind athletes that it's okay to talk about them, as Dr. Finlayson can tell you.
I think one of the best things that we can do is be really open about our own struggles. And even if you don't have a mental health diagnosis, when you're struggling with something, it's okay to say, wow, this is really tough, or I really had a hard time with this, and kind of model that to your children, model it to your friends, model it to your coworkers, because when you sort of open that up, that we're not always perfect and not everything's going to be going great. Sometimes we have bad days. It's okay to talk about that. It's all right to reach out and just be honest. If you model that kind of in your own life, in your own circles, then you can kind of help to sort of set that trend so that people will know when they're struggling, this is the person that was able to kind of talk about it in a way that didn't make them feel bad. Maybe they're a person that I could go to and just kind of talk to. I think that the most difficult thing for me as I am helping people is knowing how treatable mental health is, and yet it can't be treated if you don't go in and get help for it. And so that's, I think, the most tragic part of losing individuals is that if everybody can go in and just kind of seek help when they need it, these are all conditions that really can be managed, but most of the time can't be managed on their own. So go in and get help, and we need to open up access to be able to do that.
Another positive note from the study was that 70% of all student athletes reported having people on campus they can trust to provide support when needed. One area that shows more room for improvement, however, is that only 50% reported feeling comfortable seeking support from a licensed mental health provider on campus. It should be noted, though, that some campuses have more access to mental health counseling than others. I mentioned early on that I first thought of the idea for this podcast in 2019. I recorded several interviews with an old system that were unfortunately lost to technical issues. However, while I was unable to schedule a second interview with her, for this rendition of the podcast, I had to highlight the work of one of those original interviewees as it applies here. Former Towson University gymnast Olivia Lubarski found herself struggling with depression during her time in college. While there were rehab plans and doctors on hand for her when she ruptured her Achilles, she found there wasn't the same kind of treatment available for her mental health struggles. Liv started the program Own Your Roar, a mental health student group. The goal was to get help for student athletes on campus that were in need of it. Since then, She graduated from Towson, delivering the commencement speech while also delivering a TED Talk called Perfection Paralyzes Potential. It's been watched more than 11,000 times on YouTube. She's participated in mental health summits with NFL tight end Hayden Hurst and former First Lady Michelle Obama. She's currently a member of Mental Health America. Again, she started this path when she was barely in her 20s and still just a college student. If a college kid can do something like that, imagine what we could do as a whole. Now, about addiction. I could spend a lifetime talking about this topic, especially as a person in recovery myself. It's easy to talk about simply not doing something, but just like with sports, there's the physical act of not doing it and convincing your mind to stop doing it. Confused? Janell explains it much better than me.
The more you tell yourself not to do something, the more you're going to, in fact, do it. You know, if you say, don't miss that shot, you're increasing the chances of you missing it. You have a better chance if you tell yourself something technique-wise to do. So instead of saying, don't think about X, what if you took some deep breaths and worked with your nervous system? So I think there's so much more research around the mind-body connection and needing to work with both of them at the same time instead of just getting your body to do something. There was a quote I heard many years ago: sport is played with the body, but won with the mind. And if you ask athletes, what percentage of your performance do you think is mental? Most of them say 80%, 90%. Well, how much time do you spend training your mind? And it's zero. There's a problem here.
I wanted to bring someone else in now that we haven't heard from yet. Someone with an extensive background in the world of athletics and in the world of mental health.
Hi, I'm Mia St. John. I'm a 5-time world boxing champion and mental health advocate.
Mia is a WBC welterweight champion and an IBA and IFPA lightweight champion. She grew up studying Taekwondo, spending 23 years in that world and compiling a record of 27-1 in Taekwondo competitions. She switched to boxing at the age of 29, recording a knockout of Angelica Villain in just 54 seconds on Valentine's Day, 1997. She signed a contract with legendary boxing promoter Don King and then Top Rank Boxing, serving on the undercard for the Golden Boy himself, Oscar De La Hoya.
It was a major switch from having to kind of relearn everything to go into boxing, but it was exhilarating. I mean, it was a dream that I had ever since I saw the movie Rocky at 12 years old. I had been waiting for women to be able to box, and finally when we were, I kind of followed in the footsteps of Christy Martin. I did leave Don King for Bob Arum so I could open for Oscar De La Hoya, because Christy was already opening for Mike Tyson. And I think I was a better match with Oscar De La Hoya anyway. The fact that we were both Latinos and we were both getting a lot of attention for our looks, and so it was a better fit anyway.
Mia won 22 of her first 23 fights, with the other fight ending in a draw. She was on top of the world, posing on the cover of Playboy in 1999 as part of an 11-page pictorial. She married soap opera star Christophe St. John and lived the high life. This was all after battling mental health issues and addiction before she became a boxer. She boxed until 2016, finishing her career with 49 wins, 14 losses, and 2 draws. That included a bout against Christy Martin in 2002, which she lost, but fought all 10 rounds after moving up 2 weight classes and coming in as a massive underdog. The most important part of Mia's life, however, isn't the impressive legacy she left behind in the ring. It's the mental health advocacy she's done outside of it. Mia's son Julian was born in 1989 and was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. Having earned a psychology degree from the University of California, Northridge, she became involved in mental health advocacy shortly after Julian's diagnosis.
I had started the Mia St. John Foundation back in 2010. So what I did was I just initiated programs for the mentally ill who were drug addicted or homeless. And that was in honor of my son. Every time I had to get on a plane and leave my son was the hardest thing I had to do. Many times I got on the plane crying because schizophrenia is such a difficult illness and requires 24/7 care. So it was very difficult when I wasn't there. I had to find the right care for my son.
Mia even partnered with now retired NBA player Metta World Peace, formerly known as Ron Artest, to fight for public change. The two paired in November of 2010 with U.S. Representative Grace Napolitano to promote the Mental Health in Schools Act, increasing funding for mental health therapists in schools. She spoke at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus alongside then-President Barack Obama. All of this as a means to helping others like Julian. Tragically, however, Julian's issues progressed to the point that he died by suicide at a mental health facility in 2014 at the age of 25.
I knew that I'd lost my world, that there would be no coming back from that. There's no recovering from losing a child, and so I knew the rest of my life would be in grief and pain, and that never goes away. You just simply have to learn how to live with it, but pain is always with you, but you learn to move forward and to help others, and that enables me to wake up every morning.
After 30 years of sobriety, Julian's death led Mia to relapse.
My mental health got so bad, I had to be hospitalized twice. It was just complete torture, and I just couldn't live like that anymore. And the only way out was to die. And I knew I had to live for my daughter and to go on to help others. I knew I had a greater purpose in life, and I had to live for that. It was hard coming back. I went through a deep depression and severe anxiety and panic attacks, and it was a living nightmare till I finally got sober again. But after my son died, I felt like I just didn't want to live anymore. That was the feeling behind it. But coming back, I realized that I had a much greater purpose in life, and that was to help others. And it was much more significant than my career as a fighter.
After getting sober again, Mia resumed work with her foundation, speaking at schools and juvenile detention centers about overcoming hardships and the importance of education, speaking about addiction and her own struggles.
We started programs in mental health facilities, homeless shelters. Currently, we have our program in a mental health facility that is also serves as a homeless shelter. And we do boxing, we do yoga, meditation, dance, all sorts of programs. When I'm helping others, it helps me. It's very cathartic. And when I talk about it, it helps me, and hearing feedback from others that are experiencing the same mental health issues, that helps me also. So it's kind of a win-win.
Mia also says that the larger conversation around mental health in athletics, and mental health in general, has grown exponentially, and that's a good thing. However, it also comes with its own set of issues.
The bad side is there's a lack of education. Like when you say the word schizophrenia, what does that mean? Do people even know what schizophrenia looks like? Sometimes schizophrenia looks like this person's just an asshole, but that person is suffering inside. They isolate a lot. So a lot of times parents who are uneducated cannot tell whether their child has schizophrenia or is suffering from psychosis. Teachers can't tell. I mean, we're so uneducated. If you ask a layperson what is bipolar, they can't tell you. What is schizophrenia? They can't tell you. What is psychosis? They can't tell you. We need to be educated and know what the signs are, what the symptoms are. And a lot of times you really have to experience it to really understand it. I think it should be in public schools, for one, mental health. So kids know if they're experiencing these symptoms to go get help. My son was hearing voices and didn't tell anyone. So we need to educate our children, first of all. And there's a national organization that actually gives 6-week courses in mental illness, and that's NAMI.org, and they're nationwide. And anyone can sign up for the classes.
Next, toxic fandom. I'll be honest, this is a topic where it's a little hard to remain hopeful. Walt Coleman keeps a positive attitude about most things, but he expressed skepticism that the issue would get any better.
All you need to do is go to a Pee Wee game and listen to the parents. I mean, it's at every level. And I guess the big thing is understand that you have to have people that do that job. If you think they're so bad, why don't you get out there and do it? But when you ask people to volunteer, they don't want to do it. They would rather holler and scream at somebody than get out there and try to do it themselves. So it's trying to understand what's the old saying, walk in the other person's shoes, try to understand what they're going through.
As hard as it can be to remember sometimes, even toxic fandom has started to see some pushback. Walt mentioned in episode 3 that fans are now being banned for inappropriate behavior. And in 2023, one New Jersey Little League implemented a new rule that if you fight or harass umpires, you will face a year suspension unless you sign up to work and volunteer as an umpire for 3 games. More and more athletes are also opening up about the pain they've experienced from online harassment, and harassers are receiving more flack. During warm-ups of a February 2024 game between the Dallas Mavericks and Phoenix Suns, a fan near the floor began yelling at and harassing Suns forward Kevin Durant. When the fan called Durant a bitch, Durant approached her, and suddenly, she began to smile and attempt to high-five him. Durant said of the incident after the game,
"They don't look at us as humans sometimes. When you get a chance to let a person know how you feel real quick, they'll backtrack. We're animals, we're circus acts, we're entertainers to them instead of real people."
A tweet with Durant's comments received over 13,000 likes on Twitter, showing a growing understanding from some people. As for criticism of past mistakes, we're starting to see people push back there as well. Even former President Obama has pushed back on the concept of so-called cancel culture. However, the problem still persists. In the 90s, Chicago Bulls general manager Jerry Krause helped put together one of the greatest dynasties in the history of sports, as the Bulls won 6 NBA titles with Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and head coach Phil Jackson. However, the relationship between Krause and the team eventually soured. He declined to bring Jackson back as head coach after the 1998 season, which resulted in Jordan opting to retire, as he said he'd never play for anyone but Jackson. Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, and others were all either traded or released as the Bulls opted for a rebuild. In the 26 years since then, the Bulls have made the Eastern Conference Finals just one time. Krause died in 2017 from a combination of health issues and was posthumously inducted into the NBA Hall of Fame. In January of 2024, Krause's widow Thelma attended a Bulls game against the Golden State Warriors, where Jerry was inducted into the Chicago Bulls Ring of Honor. During the ceremony, fans began booing loudly at the mention of Jerry Krause's name, bringing Thelma to tears. That should show you toxic fandom is still alive and well. However, in a positive note, the fans were widely criticized for the behavior. Warriors head coach Steve Kerr was furious after the game, saying,
"It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. I'm just devastated for Thelma and the Krause family."
Bulls announcer Stacey King, ESPN commentator Brian Windhorst, and TNT analyst and Hall of Fame player Charles Barkley all publicly criticized the fans' reaction. It may not be much, but it is growth, at least of some kind. When it comes to women's sports, we already talked about the tremendous amount of growth happening in basketball and other sports as more fans are starting to watch. A few weeks after Caitlin Clark signed her historic shoe deal with Nike, Aja Wilson of the Las Vegas Aces also signed an exclusive shoe deal, after WNBA fans took to Twitter calling for a deal to get done. There's still financial hurdles for retired players. While players such as Dawn Staley, Teresa Witherspoon, and Becky Hammon have all failed careers in coaching after they retired, and players such as Candace Parker have seen success as analysts in the booth, there are many other former players with limited options upon retirement. While stars such as Lisa Leslie and Sue Bird were able to use their image for marketing and business opportunities, people such as Val Whiting didn't have those same opportunities. Val mentioned when we talked that the league could do better at helping its retired players. However, she also mentioned ways in which some organizations are already helping those players out.
Nike has created programs for WNBA players. It's called Win at Nike. It's a program specifically for WNBA players to grow and develop a career at Nike. And so you apply every year, and if you get in, you get a six-figure job and great benefits and relocation help and all that. So different companies like Nike are seeing the benefit of having female athletes in their organization. And also the phenomena that we didn't always have the career path that others have. I mean, I didn't even have my first job interview until like 2013. It was my first time putting together a resume, because before that I was playing basketball, then I had my own business. I didn't know how to do a job interview. There's lots of stories out there like that we didn't really have any quote unquote real job experience until we played 10 years professionally, and our colleagues who graduated college with us are already way up in the corporate ladder and have years and years of experience over us. But we have skills that we can bring to the corporate world from being an athlete that don't necessarily mean that we're going to be entry level making $15 an hour.
Val added that the WNBA, NBA, ABA, and Globetrotters have partnered with companies like Google and Amazon to help get former players certified in tech training to help them either get jobs within those companies or to help them grow their business. There are programs for project management as well, all of which are free to former players. While those jobs may not be suited for everyone, and it doesn't mean there aren't still ways in which the league can improve, these are all new things. The progress is visible, and progress will continue to come the more people push for it. The subject of suicide is incredibly difficult to discuss, no doubt. I was initially conflicted about reaching out to Trina Derenbecker to talk about Matt at all, knowing how hard this topic can be. It's also challenging to discuss because, as mentioned in episode 5, it's one of the metrics that hasn't been getting better. It's been getting worse. I'd love to tell you that it's not as bad as it seems, but the truth is that the US is 31st in the world in suicide rate. 37 nations have seen their suicide rates increase over the past 24 years, with America being one of them. However, the more we're willing to talk about this matter, the easier it gets to deal with. The issue with suicide is partially that we're not willing to talk about it, but also that when we do talk about it, we don't know how to. But as hard as it may seem, we have to learn. Thankfully, there are people out there taking these steps.
My name is Kym Hilinski. I am a co-founder of Hilinski's Hope and mom of Kelly, Tyler, and Ryan.
Mark Hilinski, Kym's co-founder on Hilinski's Hope. Kelly, Tyler, and Ryan's dad.
Tyler, our middle son, is who we lost to suicide January 16, 2018.
We've spent the last 5 years trying to figure out what happened to Tyler, share the stories about Tyler in our process in the hopes that some of those breadcrumbs will help others going forward.
Tyler Hilinski was a standout high school quarterback in Southern California. He passed for over 3,000 yards and 36 touchdowns his junior year of high school.
So I can tell you this, on your list of the sweet and kind people, Tyler would be at the top. He was just that kid. He was fun to be around, and we were just so grateful and blessed that he was our son. And he decided to play football for Coach Mike Leach up at Washington State, and excited about that.
As a redshirt sophomore in 2016, Tyler earned a spot in Washington State history after he came off the bench against Boise State and led a 21-point comeback to beat the Broncos in triple overtime. After starting quarterback Luke Falk suffered a late-season injury, Tyler earned his first career start in the 2017 Holiday Bowl against Michigan State. With Falk departing for the NFL, The belief was that Tyler would succeed him as the Cougars' starting quarterback in 2018. The opportunity never came, however, as Tyler was dealing with issues no one was aware of. Just over 2 weeks after the Holiday Bowl, tragedy struck the Hilinskis.
We were all on a vacation right after the new year of 2018 down in Cabo, and everybody flew back home. Mark, myself, and our youngest son, Ryan, who was a junior in high school at the time, we flew back to Southern California. Our oldest son, Kelly, was at Utah playing football there and going to school, and Tyler flew up to Washington. And just a week or so later, January 16, 2018, he took his life by firearm. It's a struggle for us every single day without him. Sometimes I have to remind myself that he actually is gone, and that's hard to process. But we sort of made mission through our pain to continue to share Tyler's story in the hopes that it possibly could change or maybe even save a life. The foundation was formed and incorporated as a 501c3 in March 2018. But our thought process was, if Tyler was struggling and he was doted on and loved by his teammates, his coaches, his friends, his brothers, how many other athletes are out there struggling, afraid to reach out for help? Maybe the stigma is part of it. Our athletes are taught from such a young age to be strong, to grind through tough practices, tough games, maybe even a minor injury. And we thought if Tyler couldn't reach out for help, there has to be others out there that are just suffering and struggling in silence. And so we formed Hilinski's Hope, and the mission really is to beat down that stigma attached to mental illness, to raise awareness. We do it a bunch of different ways, and provide resources for our student athletes to support their mental health.
While a lot of people out there can post a hashtag or send a motivational TikTok, the Hilinskis have met with coaches, athletes, and others to share Tyler's story. While it's impossible to measure the impact they've had, if even one person reaches out for help, that's a difference made. And Mark and Kym have indeed made that difference.
We were at a school in Alabama and met with the team and packing up our things, and coach comes running into us and says, "Mark and Kym, I need to see you in the room next door. Please come over." So we run over, and in that room there's a gigantic linebacker just sitting there with his position coach, bawling, just crying. And he used those words that you just said. "I've been struggling with my mental health for so long, I just didn't want to be a burden to anybody." And to see a person that big, and from the outside, you perceive him as just so strong, but on the inside, he was really struggling. And the school was great. They got his parents involved, got him into counseling, and he listened to Tyler's story and realized that he needed to reach out and ask for help. And so we hear those common stories over and over again. I can tell you, we were with another team, and this was on the West Coast, and in the middle of our Tyler talk, a player breaks down, and he was struggling as he was listening to Tyler's story. We stopped the talk. The players went over and hugged on him. The head coach went over and hugged on this player. But I think the reason really why we shared Tyler's story is that some of these players, they see themselves in Tyler, and we share Tyler's story in the hopes that it will give them strength to really reach out and ask for the help that they need.
Janell talked earlier about the need for trainers, coaches, officials, and higher authority figures to learn the signs of mental health struggles. Mark and Kym believe that if those coaches and athletic directors invest in their players' mental health, they'll see better on-field improvements. But they also believe it's important for those coaches and ADs to remember that there's a reason so many athletes don't want to reach out in the first place. They believe that more people in power care than the average person may think, but they may not necessarily know how to help those who are struggling the most.
I think the vast majority of our coaches are trying their very best every day. We may disagree with all that. At their heart, they see those kids as an extension of their family, and the best ones take care of that. Not all of them are equipped with those skill sets. That can be a learned process. So I'd say the most encouraging piece is the feedback from the kids, unsolicited, tends to be more positive. How to do things. We have therapists that we like. We have the resources we need. And that critical juncture, to me, is where Tyler got stuck. Even though where he was, the resources just simply didn't exist. Had they existed, though, it wouldn't have mattered because he never said, "I need them." And so we put a lot of time and effort putting energy into getting resources, people, educational materials, etc. And yet we have to remember that balance. If we don't get the kids to ask and take advantage of those, then we have to look at that front side and the awareness and the stigma reduction. And so it's very hard to define, I suppose, but there's a general sense of hope with those guys.
Dr. Finlayson emphasizes that the biggest thing in mental health and athletics is structural change. While every little bit helps, it's the leagues, companies, and organizations that make the real change happen.
We actually work with one particular professional sports team that not only has sports psychology and mental health for the athletes and the coaches, but now has been offering on-site mental health therapy sessions covered for their employees at their place of employment. And that is a commitment that they have made top down. We are going to invest money in being able to make sure that everyone in our organization has access to this. That is a commitment, and that's a choice that organizations can make to really be serious behind how do we structurally make it possible to break down the barriers to care, and how do we make sure that people can get to the access.
The purpose of this episode is to show that there's reasons for hope. There are things in our power that can be done, but some organizations may be more willing to help than others. And while we can help those athletes out, the choice will be theirs at the end of the day. So what choices can they make? Therapy, religion, medication? There's all sorts of avenues. There are some avenues that you may not expect, avenues that may not be available for everyone but are for some. I want to tread lightly with this next portion, and I'll offer some caveats as well, but I also think it's important to include it for those that it may be helpful for.
My name is Kyle Turley, and I am a husband and father, football coach, former NFL player, artist, and entrepreneur.
Kyle played 9 years in the NFL along the offensive line. A consensus All-American in 1997 at San Diego State, Kyle was drafted 8th overall by the New Orleans Saints in 1998. He was selected to the All-Rookie team that same year, the All-Pro team in 2000, and again in 2003, that time as a member of the St. Louis Rams. He was a beloved figure during his time in New Orleans, turning down the only Pro Bowl invitation of his career in 2001 to instead serve as the Grand Marshal of the Endymion Parade during Mardi Gras. After the 2002 season, among many roster changes for New Orleans, Kyle was traded to St. Louis for a second-round pick. He immediately signed a 5-year, $26.5 million contract, making him the 4th highest-paid offensive lineman in the league. In a 2010 congressional hearing on the NFL's handling of concussions, Kyle said in Week 7 of the 2003 NFL season, he took a knee to the back of the head and suffered a concussion, and was cleared for practice by midweek before starting the following week. He underwent surgery for a herniated disc in March of 2004 and re-aggravated the injury during training camp, ending up on injured reserve for the 2004 season. Instead of having a second surgery, he opted for rehab. He dropped from 310 pounds to 235 pounds during that stretch. He began feuding with Rams head coach Mike Martz after Kyle felt the team mismanaged his rehab, recklessly and carelessly pushing him back too soon and asking him to play through the injury initially. He also said the team doctors gave him painkillers while trying to conceal how serious his back injury was in order to keep him on the field. He found himself addicted to pain drugs, saying that painkillers were handed out like candy after games by the NFL.
I bought 5,000 Vicodin from a doctor in Texas. Got shipped in the mail to me, 5,000 Vicodin, because I just thought, oh, I'm going to need these forever. And the doctors keep telling me they're no big deal. And I only use them on prescribed use. I'm using 1 or 2 a day. I'll need these the rest of my life. Let me, while I have the money, go buy these things because they're so readily available and everybody's coming at you left and right. Hey, you want to buy 5,000 Vicodin, 10,000 Percocets, 5,000 Lortabs? Doctors were able to get this stuff out the back door. We were being solicited constantly by these guys.
Kyle was released by the Rams in January of 2005 and spent the 2005 season continuing to rehabilitate. In June of 2006, he signed a 2-year deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. He started 7 games, but further injuries prevented him from playing anymore. He dealt with hamstring, ankle, shoulder, and back problems with 5 starts in the season, before announcing his retirement in December of that year. Since then, he's had a career in music and coached football at the high school level. He was nearing the end of the football season in Nashville when I spoke with him. Mostly, though, Kyle has been involved in advocacy for players' rights, be it from a retirement standpoint or medical standpoint. Mostly, he's looked into ways for helping athletes deal with physical and mental ailments through a brand he co-founded known as Revenant. He's also partnered with Gridiron Cannabis Coalition. Kyle's primary focus has been on studying and advocating for the healing benefits of marijuana. Before going any further, I want to stress, I haven't smoked pot since 2016. We've had multiple people on this podcast that are in recovery like myself, and Todd spoke about how abstinence from pot is very important to his overall well-being. There are some viewpoints that Kyle expresses that I do not agree with. There's some claims that he made that I'm rather skeptical of, while other statements he made have been outright debunked. But the fact is, he has fought as hard as anyone for retired NFL players. Some of his claims have been backed by medical professionals, and for those who don't struggle with addiction, there honestly has been a lot of evidence to suggest that pot can help with physical and mental ailments. Again, I can't co-sign all of Kyle's claims, particularly when it comes to pot and addicts, but when he speaks on how pot has improved his own health and the health of others, I thought it was worth listening to and letting the listeners determine for themselves if it's a solution for them.
You could completely extract cannabinoids from your own body that can help repair what you have going wrong, just like stem cells and all these other things. You have an endogenous cannabinoid system. Every human has it, every mammal has it. The cannabinoid system exists, and it is the number one regulatory system in our body. And so when you break down to the base of the science, when you have something wrong with you, where should you start to try to fix it? If you take your car in to get it fixed, what do? They plug it in the computer, and the computer tells them it goes to the source. Let's go to the source, and then we can track it from there. Well, how can a human do that if you're not being exposed and told about the number one regulatory system in your body? It's impossible, and that's why they continue to be let loose on the communities of our country and the world to kill millions of people. Pfizer, all these companies, the Sackler family, all of these people have faced 0 jail time. More people will die in this war over in Israel against them and the Palestinians. More people will die this year because of these families that have created a cartel and worked with our United States government to put these things in our communities and tell people they work, that they help. And they don't. They don't work, they don't help. I'm 10 years free from every pharmaceutical I was ever taking. Not one. Cannabis is the answer. Everybody else that's talking about this, that's still alive and not in a mental institution and not dead from a gunshot self-inflicted. And unfortunately, the NFL doesn't care to listen past what they did with me and a number of other people that tried to explain this to them.
For clarification, the Sackler family were the owners of Purdue Pharma, which went bankrupt in 2023 following a myriad of lawsuits and fines due to their role in the opioid epidemic. The number of overdose-related deaths connected to opioids in the U.S. over the years is estimated in the 6 figures. At the time I'm writing this, in May of 2024, roughly 37,000 people have been killed in the Israel-Hamas war.
It is a true medication. It was the number one prescribed medication in the United States up until 1934. Hemp was thriving, and cannabis was the number one medicine prescribed, and people were living and curing and fighting and beating diseases with it. They got rid of all that because the Chinese come over and they had their tents everywhere with the railroads and all these other things, and these guys are going, wait a minute, all these people keep coming to this tent for all this relief that they're getting at all these Eastern applications. We need to own this thing. And there we go, pharmaceutical industry born out of these companies that were selling and pushing cannabis to everybody. They shifted as soon as they realized, oh, this is helping people, saving people's lives.
Kyle was told he was symptomatic of CTE at the age of 34, and in 2015 he was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. He's dealt with a seizure disorder, bouts of vertigo, depression, anxiety, rage, suicidal thoughts, memory problems, light sensitivity, and migraines. He was a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit filed against the NFL seeking medical benefits and compensation for former players suffering from head trauma. Initially, that lawsuit resulted in a settlement of $765 million, which was later amended to exceed $1 billion. He's agreed to donate his brain to science after his death and played a major role in educating football players on head trauma. He began his cannabis advocacy in 2015, including commencing a study on cannabis as a means of treating chronic pain and depression. That same year, he was part of an open letter to the NFL urging a change in the league's marijuana policy. Doctors for Cannabis Regulation penned the letter, which was signed by several other players as well. He played a critical role as a member of Gridiron Greats in developing NFL Lifeline, a 24/7 confidential crisis hotline for current and former players, an idea he conceived after the 2012 suicide of Hall of Famer Junior Seau. When it comes to suicide specifically, he again points to his cannabis use for aiding him with his own thoughts.
I don't think of suicide anymore. I'm able to rise above all the things of this world that have been plaguing my life, from real things to made up stuff that's going on with this brain thing. Dementia is a real thing, and I've been diagnosed with stage 2 progressive dementia. That happened over 5 years ago. And so that's a progressive disease. I feel I've been able, through the doctors and follow-up testing over these years, they still say I'm at level 2. I'm not progressing. So, there's a lot of science that speaks to this when it comes to dealing with what is mental health. And mental health is being able to have control of your brain, because your brain can go and make you think a lot of things. And I don't care if you played football or you're just anybody out there on the street, your brain can manifest a lot of things. And if you don't have control of that, your life's going to be very difficult.
Again, the idea of this episode primarily is to remind you that there are still things that can be done, and that there is hope. But when it comes to progress for retired NFL players, funding for CTE studies, and other such issues, Kyle sees little reason to hope.
There's really not much progress. You'd be surprised. The progress that's only been made really is in the compensation in some of these cases with the concussion settlement. But they're only paying out on those if you're pretty much an invalid. You need somebody to hold your hand everywhere. And that's not what that was for. This is a real brain disease that affects us in our community every day. And, they neglected this thing when Bennett Omalu brought it to them, and it became what it is. And we're experiencing this now on another level. People don't even know about it because they have control of the media. And the NFL is the biggest perpetrator of fake news, from the games being fixed to the players and the discrepancies of pay. Our union is completely bought by the league itself. There's a $500 billion pot of money that's being going to be paraded around here in the NFL, and the players union negotiated a collective bargaining agreement that's only worth $1 billion of that. It's insane, the things that have happened, to where you as a public get distracted because you see one guy get a $200 million contract, and you think everybody gets that, and the reality is they don't. And you still have guys playing for almost peanuts to earn a job in the NFL. It's actually worse than it's ever been, to be honest with you.
Throughout this podcast, we've discussed all the mental health issues that apply to athletics. We've talked about problems athletes face and things they deal with. However, think about this. Despite his upbringing, Todd Marinovich is now coaching football and watches it with his son all the time. Matt Bush got out of jail and went back to baseball. Walt Coleman officiated another 17 years after the Tuck Rule game, and Noah Carter played basketball until he exhausted his college eligibility. Val Whiting still watches games. Maddie Hudak's popularity is bigger than ever. Mia St. John kept fighting even after the loss of her son. I spoke to the Hilinskis when they were living in Chicago, where their son Ryan was playing football at Northwestern. And even with all the physical and neurological conditions he has, here's what Kyle Turley said when I asked if he'd go back and play football again if he could.
No question. Yeah. It's the greatest game in the world, greatest game in the universe. It's ever been created, played, and it forever will be. It's been an honor to play it, and I hope to hand it down to my own son if he wants to play here as he's getting older. The only things that I wish I could go back with is the truth of the game. I will do it 110% and go every bit as hard as I ever did. And I probably would have taken a lot better care of myself in a lot of different ways. It was a dream come true. I would go back 100% and I'd fix all this stupid shit that's went wrong with it, because it's fixable. It's not unfixable. You just have very ignorant, stupid people in charge.
All of that is to say, sports in general are not a problem. They're actually a solution for many other problems and can be a tool in many other ways if utilized properly. But that will take change. As we've established, change comes from up top, but it also happens at the individual level. So what can we do? Kyle thinks, well, you probably know what Kyle thinks.
Allow cannabis to be studied in humans. Cannabis is scheduled as a one drug, which is non-researchable on humans. You cannot use it to test on a human body in any study that will be accredited. And there's been a bajillion studies that have been done that have proved that it cures cancer, proved that it helps brain disease, stops the progression of Alzheimer's, all these other things. But it's still a Schedule 1 drug. If they drop the scheduling of cannabis, I won't have to say nothing. Nobody will have to say anything. As soon as they drop the schedule of cannabis, which is supposed to happen here, it's supposed to drop to Schedule 3, which allows it to be studied and researched on humans. People want it to come from the sky and, chariots of fire and angels and all these things. And what's going to happen is, an exposure of everyone's Christ, because that will force the medical community to acknowledge the number one regulatory system in the human body that exists in the very center and top of your brain, which is your Christ.
I know we've drilled this point home a few times, but the other thing we can do is be better to one another, as Trina Derenbecker says.
The ugliness on social media is just horrible. And the things that people will say, I'm a Saints fan, and I read the comments about the Saints and it hurts me because, yeah, okay, they played poorly, or this player played poorly, or whatever. Let's not all pile on. We don't need that. That's not helpful. And that's a real person that you're doing that to.
In addition to reducing shaming, it's also about little things we can do and say. Take suicide, for example. The Hilinskis point out that sometimes just adjusting small words can make a big difference.
Words are really important. It's your business, right? And so while we don't give instruction or try to train anybody how to talk, there's a certain element, and I think you can think of commit suicide versus died by suicide as one of them.
Dr. Finlayson says that's a legitimate topic that comes up in mental health all the time.
Language is very important. Losing someone to suicide, as opposed to when you use words commit suicide, it puts a lot of shame and a lot of blame and a lot of negativity towards that person that you've lost. And so just the shift in the language, it helps the people that are grieving. It also helps the people that are struggling right now to kind of understand it in a little bit of a different way.
And remember, as I've said at least once each episode, regardless of anything else, at the end of the day, when the lights go out, athletes are every bit as human as everyone else.
They're doing it for themselves and their families and their friends and because they love it. But the end product is put on TV, it's put on the radio, tickets are sold, and there's a performance element to all of that. And when you think about that as the average person, there's a tendency to think they're treated better and things are taken care of for them. And in many cases, that 1%, that happens, right? But for the average person, just remember that is the 1%. And the rest of these kids, and whether it's Division II, NAIA, junior college, and certainly even in high school, our kids do extra to play those sports. And whatever additional accompaniments or lane clearings that they get out of it, the balance isn't quite there. And then you said something at the beginning of our conversation about social media, which plays such a huge role in how these kids view each other, how they communicate, and so forth. There's so many good things about it, but the vitriol and the level of depravity, it's sort of gotten off the rails. And if you're not equipped to hear that, you could take it personally and it could affect you that way, obviously. And if you're not careful, you don't talk about it. And so all of these things we experience as non-athletes, we've got to remember that they're under a great deal of pressure and burden that maybe we don't anticipate. And while that's easy, just be kinder to people.
It also takes more than just those struggling with addiction, anxiety, and other issues. It takes all of us, even those who may not have any sort of diagnosed disorder.
My name is Connor Carrick. I'm a professional hockey player, currently playing for the Coachella Valley Firebirds. This will be my 11th year professionally. I'm a dog dad to a French Bulldog, and I have a 2.5-year-old son with my wife.
Connor was a 5th-round NHL draft pick by the Washington Capitals in 2012 and has played 242 NHL games throughout his career. The Firebirds are the AHL affiliate of the Seattle Kraken. He spoke with me from his residence prior to the 2023-24 season. The reason I wanted to speak with him isn't because he suffers from generalized anxiety, depression, addiction, or anything. It's because he doesn't. And yet, mental health is a cause that he's championed for throughout his career. Part of the reason for that is he recognizes that anyone can experience symptoms of anxiety and depression.
I dealt with some pretty severe performance-related issues earlier in my career, anxiety issues, and there's great humility in accepting that physically sometimes there are tasks either in my game. The jump, for example, from junior to the NHL is massive. The players are way better, they're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, the pressure's way more intense, the systems are way more dynamic. And there's no weakness in admitting as a young player, I think I'm just ill-equipped for the challenge here at hand.
Connor mentioned a time playing with the Dallas Stars in 2018 when he had a string of successful games, only to suffer an injury. Just like players with diagnosable mental health issues, he feared for a spot in the lineup. Through it all, though, he and his now wife, Lexi, navigated the troubles together and began using their social media accounts to advocate for mental health and wellness, and to let people know that sometimes it's okay to not feel okay.
I've had turnovers in NHL games, and I turn on my Twitter and I check it out, and 30 people tell me I suck. And maybe under normal circumstance, if I played well, I'm more resilient, but I'm in a wounded state at that point. I know I sucked that night. And yeah, the additional kicks to the torso, they do damage, more than you'd think. And a lot of players, you'd be surprised, are, particularly sensitive. It's the human core to really desire people to like you and to do well for the people that, are generally rooting for you. And I think if we can just zoom out to fully understand all of the contributing factors to our mental well-being, the conversation would be more dynamic. When I sit down and I don't have 4 packs of Skittles for lunch, and I have enough protein to drive the satiation chemicals in my brain, and I eat a diverse vegetable diet to improve my gut microbiome, which is so related to mental health, that's me working on my mental health. It doesn't have to be some structured psychological therapy, medicinal approach with medication. It takes many forms.
Connor also has input for those who have loved ones who are dealing with something in the moment. Sometimes you have to remember that you can't really know what they're feeling. Just try your best to have empathy.
I do have people close to me in my life that have had tough days or extended periods of tough days. And maybe your patience with them is a little thin. Why can't they snap out of it? What's wrong with them? And I think it's a delicate balance where you want to support but not play the hero. You want to provide a healthy environment for them to try to take the reins in their own life, but at the end of the day, it is up to the person. They do need to want to have help. I think if you can not sabotage their efforts to improve, you cannot overly judge them on their difficult day and come from a place of should and all that, and maybe just an invitation to participate. Hey, I'm going to read tonight before bed. I want to have some deep sleep. So there are really small things that we can do that have robust results, and that's the tricky part when things get chronic and they become this vicious cycle. I don't have a perfect answer other than see the best in that person, maybe use some grace as they're kind of sorting out the best way to help themselves.
I know I've gone on about how no matter what we do, there will always be mental health struggles. It's almost as if it's part of our DNA. But as cheesy, hokey, or corny as it may sound, I'm going to ask that you listen to me really quickly. If you're someone out there who is struggling right now, no matter what area of life.
Reach out to somebody in that area that has found whatever success is to you. And most people that have found this thing that you're seeking, most of the time are willing to share with you how they did it. I think people are great, and I think people are super giving and loving, but they don't know and they can't give and love if you don't open your mouth.
Now, I know it can be hard to listen sometimes. We always want to do everything ourselves, and we always seem to be so convinced that we've got it under control. But here's the thing.
Whatever you think you know, you probably have no idea. I always thought I knew everything and I didn't need to listen to what someone else had to say because I was going to figure it out on my own. So listen to the people that you look up to.
It's okay to not know everything. In fact, the easier it is for you to admit that you don't know everything, the easier it is to be helped. It shows you have the humility to open yourself up to different possibilities. I know it's scary, but hey,
30 to 40% of athletes, whether you're a collegiate or a professional athlete, struggle with mental health issues. So you're not alone.
What, you feel like a burden? Come on. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. So the world isn't ending for you right now, and you think that means you shouldn't bother anyone? Let me tell you, it's exactly the opposite.
Be proactive about positive habits, positive things that you want to try to do, so that if a crisis hits or if you do end up having some anxiety that's problematic, you've already got some great skills in place.
It's perfectly fine, of course, if you want to try something else first and see how that works. But if the time ever comes that you really feel you need some help,
there are actual hotlines that you can call. You just dial 988 on your phone. Or if you have a close relationship with a relative or a friend, let them know how you're feeling and don't be afraid to get help. And those feelings are very scary. Those thoughts are very scary. But if you can just dig deep down inside and muster up the courage to reach out, it could save your life.
Now, let's say you're the someone who's been reached out to. You're not sure what to do. This isn't your wheelhouse. Sometimes you don't have to know exactly what to say. You just have to let them know that you love them. But remember,
love doesn't mean without limits, meaning that it is important that we set limits or boundaries with other people to maintain our own health, and just that love goes a long way. And if you can offer that to yourself or to another person, you are letting them know that their life matters.
maybe you're someone who isn't as comfortable with these sort of concepts. You don't know what to make of all these feelings and issues and whatnot. Just take a minute to remember that sometimes
they're juggling so much. What I think is that they don't realize how much they have on their plate and how much they need to let somebody carry some of that burden for them.
Also try your best to understand that sometimes the only way to help people,
we got to fight harder to bring additional resources to this problem. That means more people. It does mean technology. It does mean having these conversations and finding time, which is the critical resource.
Try and remember you can always check on others, even if you're not having the best day.
Some of my happiest memories of Matt are times that he reached out to people who maybe were outsiders.
And whether you're in need of help, being asked for help, or whatever, there's never anything wrong with practicing your skills. After all,
when it comes to the mental emotional side, there's no ceiling on how much more skillful we can get.
Most of all, everyone needs to remember
they're important.
Crazy. Who knows what that word means anymore? I guess it depends on what your philosophy is. Often it's something that people say to refer to those who are different or not normal. But John Ronson, who I mentioned a few times in this podcast, closed out his 2011 book, The Psychopath Test, by saying,
"There is no evidence that we've been placed on this planet to be especially happy or especially normal. And in fact, our unhappiness and our strangeness, our anxieties and compulsions, those least fashionable aspects of our personalities are quite often what lead us to do rather interesting things."
In 1997, Apple released an iconic commercial saluting the so-called crazy ones. In it, Steve Jobs narrates,
"Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do.
I like the idea of those definitions, but I also thought back to what Dave Chappelle said about not understanding someone, so simply labeling them crazy. I started this journey out saying that I used to think Ricky Williams was crazy, but later I realized I just didn't understand him, like Chappelle said. You can't always know what someone is dealing with, but just because they're different doesn't necessarily mean they're crazy. Or, hell, maybe it does. But like Ronson and Jobs mentioned, maybe being crazy isn't such a bad thing. Maybe it's just something, like Chappelle said, we just don't fully understand. Maybe that's the point of this whole podcast, to help people understand better, or at least want to understand better. Near the end of Stephen King's 1982 book, The Gunslinger, King's first entry in the Dark Tower series, Walter O'Dim goes on a long spiel about how insignificant the gunslinger Roland truly is. In the grand scheme of the universe, Roland was just one man. What possible difference could he make? Spoiler alert for the Dark Tower, Roland doesn't go on his journey alone. He meets companions throughout the next 7 books, and, another spoiler alert, together, they're able to save the universe from collapsing. I won't spoil everything for you, but the ending isn't entirely happy. There are heroes who die along the way and things don't work out how you'd expect. There are some aspects of the ending that are tragic. Just like the Dark Tower, not everything will work out the way you expect in life, and there will always be sadness and conflict. But it can also be a world better than the one we live in now, which is already much better than most people think. It could be a world where we're better to one another and are more willing to help each other. Walter O'Dim was right. One person alone can only do so much, but together, we could change everything. Now that would be crazy. When the Lights Go Out was written, directed, produced, and edited by me, Hart Pisani. Kevin Durant was voiced by Jared Lyons. Steve Kerr was voiced by Jim Derry. John Ronson was voiced by Alan Roberson. Steve Jobs was voiced by Preston Moore. The logo was designed by Kayla Goforth. The interviews were recorded using Zoom. The episode was pieced together using Descript and published using Spotify for podcasters. Special thanks to Preston Moore, Jared Lyons, and Alex Sharp. Thank you for listening.